The transport ships descended through purple clouds toward the surface of Kepler 186f like metal raindrops falling on an alien canvas. Tom Bradley pressed his face against the small window and watched the landscape unfold below. Rolling green. Hills stretched toward distant mountains, broken by silver rivers that caught the orange light of the system's red dwarf star. After 18 months in space, the sight of open land made his chest tight, with something between hope and homesickness. "Beautiful world," said Dr. Amy Foster from the seat beside him. She clutched a data pad filled with preliminary surveys. "The atmospheric readings are perfect. Oxygen levels at 21%, gravity at 0.98 Earth standard. We couldn't have asked for better." Tom nodded but kept watching the ground grow larger. Scattered across the landing zone, he could see the other transport ships, already touching down. Each one carried a different species, all part of the Galactic Settlement Council's grand experiment in cooperative colonization. The idea sounded good in theory. Take representatives from 5 different species, drop them on a perfect world, and let them build something together. In practice, Tom suspected it would be more complicated. The ship shuddered as it touched ground. Through the window, Tom saw the Zephyrian transport already empty, its passengers moving with quick efficiency. The tall, blue-skinned beings worked in perfect coordination, like dancers following invisible music. Their leader, Ralphie, stood in the center giving directions with sharp hand gestures. Within minutes, they had unloaded their supplies and begun surveying the immediate area with handheld devices. The Thorian ship landed with a heavy thump that shook the ground. Its thick-bodied passengers emerged slowly, their gray skin looking like living stone in the orange sunlight. Grex, their construction specialist, immediately began testing soil density with a large metal tool. His people spread out in careful patterns, each one marking spots in the dirt with bright flags. From the ethereal transport came flowing figures that seemed to dance rather than walk. Their translucent skin shifted colors as they moved, and their leader, Silana, glided between, the native plants with obvious delight. She touched leaves and bark with gentle fingers, as if greeting old friends. "Look at them go," Amy said as the human transport's doors opened. "Everyone knows exactly what they want to do." Tom stood and stretched muscles cramped from months in space. That's the problem with having a plan. Sometimes you miss what's actually in front of you. The humans emerged more slowly than the other species. While aliens rushed to claim territory and begin construction, Tom's 40 colonists gathered, in a loose circle on a small hill overlooking the landing zone. They carried basic tools and supplies, but nothing as specialized as the equipment the other species had brought. "So what's the plan, boss?" asked Pete Wilson, the colony's chief mechanic. He was a stocky man with grease permanently stained under his fingernails and a smile that suggested he found most problems amusing rather than worrying. Tom looked around the circle. These weren't soldiers or corporate executives. They were teachers, farmers, engineers, cooks, and crafters. People who understood that building something meant more than just putting walls and roofs together. First, we look. Really look. Not at what we think should be here, but what actually is here. For the next 3 days, the humans did something that puzzled their alien neighbors. They walked. They explored every hill, stream, and grove within 5 kilometers of the landing zone. Amy collected samples of everything from soil to insects, while others mapped wind patterns, water sources, and animal trails. They noted which areas got morning sun and which stayed cool in the afternoon. They found where the ground was solid and where it was soft, where plants grew thick and where they grew sparse. The Zephyrians had already begun construction on their first dome. It rose from the ground in perfect geometric curves, its blue metal surface reflecting the sky. Efficient and beautiful in its mathematical precision, it would house 20 beings in carefully calculated space. The Thorians had started digging. Their natural strength allowed them to excavate tons of earth each day, carving the beginnings of an underground complex that would protect them from weather, predators, and any other dangers this world might offer. Safety through solid stone walls and deep foundations. The ethereals worked with the living landscape itself. Silana had found a grove of tall, flexible trees and begun training their growth into curved walls and roof-like canopies. Her people sang to the plants in their musical language, encouraging growth and shaping branches into functional architecture. On the fourth day, Ralphie approached the human camp. Tom was sitting by a small fire, sketching in a notebook while his people continued their explorations. "Tom Bradley," the Zephyrian said in his precise, accented English. "I am concerned about your progress. The other species have begun construction. You have not even selected a building site." Tom looked up from his notebook. "We've selected 3 sites, actually. Just haven't started digging yet." 3? Ralphie's large eyes blinked in confusion. "The settlement guidelines call for concentrated construction for efficiency and mutual protection." "Different kind of efficiency," Tom said. He showed Ralphie his notebook, filled with sketches and measurements. "See, we found this spot near the river where the ground's got good clay. Perfect for building something that needs to hold heat for long periods. Then there's this place on the hill with the best light and air circulation. And finally, there's the main settlement area that's protected from the worst weather but still gets good drainage." Ralphie studied the sketches. They showed what looked like 3 completely different types of buildings. One was low and solid with a chimney. Another was tall with large windows. The third looked like a collection of smaller structures connected by covered walkways. "I do not understand," Ralphie said. "What are these buildings for?" "Living," Tom said simply. "The question isn't just how to survive here. It's how to live here. Really live, not just exist." The Zephyrian administrator tilted. His head, a gesture Tom had learned, indicated deep thought. Survival is the first priority. Food, shelter, security, these are logical requirements. "Sure," Tom agreed. "But humans learned a long time ago that there's more to staying alive than just not dying. You need reasons to want to stay alive. You need comfort, beauty, purpose. You need places that make you feel good about being there." That evening, the humans finally began construction, but instead of one large project, they split into 3 groups. The first began gathering stones and clay near the river, building what looked like a large oven with a tall chimney. The second started cutting timber on the hill, laying foundations for a building with unusually large windows. The third began the slow work of creating living spaces that seemed to waste a lot of room on things like separate bedrooms and a common area with no obvious function. From their efficient dome, the Zephyrians watched with growing confusion. From their expanding underground fortress, the Thorians shook their heads at human impracticality. From their living grove, the ethereals wondered why humans needed so much individual space. None of them understood yet that humans weren't just building shelter. They were building a home, and there was a difference that would matter more than anyone realized when the first winter came to their new world. The morning mist clung to the valleys like ghostly fingers, and Amy Foster stood on the hill, watching the sun paint the landscape gold and orange. 3 months had passed since landing, and the colonial settlement looked nothing like the neat, organized plans the Galactic Settlement Council had approved. Instead of a unified community, 5 distinct clusters dotted the landscape, each reflecting the nature of its builders. Amy turned from the view to check on the humans' progress. What had started as 3 mysterious projects now showed clear purpose, though their alien neighbors still seemed baffled by human priorities. The smokehouse stood complete by the river, its stone walls thick and steady, chimney drawing a thin line of smoke into the morning air. Inside, racks held strips of meat from the local game animals, slowly transforming into preserved food that would last months without refrigeration. The library took shape on the hill like a promise of something greater. Its timber frame rose, strong and tall, with windows larger than any practical building required. Pete Wilson and his crew had spent weeks getting the angles just right, ensuring the reading rooms would have perfect natural light throughout the day. The foundation included space for climate control systems that would protect books and data storage from humidity and temperature changes. The residential area sprawled across the protected valley floor in what other species considered a wasteful use of space. Human families lived in separate units connected by covered walkways, with private bedrooms, individual kitchens, and common rooms designed for relaxation rather than efficiency. Gardens grew between houses, some for vegetables, others simply for beauty. "Amy!" Pete called from below. "Ralphie's coming up the hill. Looks like he's got something on his mind." Amy walked down to meet the Zephyrian administrator. His usual composed expression showed cracks of frustration, and his precise movements carried more tension than normal. Behind him walked Grex, the Thorian construction chief, his massive frame making the ground shake with each step. Even Silana had come, her flowing movement somehow conveying urgency. "Dr. Foster," Ralphie began in his carefully modulated voice, "we need to discuss human progress with Colony Leader Bradley immediately." "He's at the Smokehouse," Amy said. "But I can answer questions about our construction projects." "This is precisely the issue," Grex rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "Projects, plural. You scatter effort across multiple non-essential constructions while basic survival needs remain unmet." They walked toward the river where Tom stood outside the smokehouse, adjusting the airflow dampers. The rich smell of smoking meat filled the air, along with herbs that grew wild in the area. Tom had discovered that certain local plants added flavors that reminded humans of home while complementing the native game. "Tom," Ralphie said without preamble, "we must call a settlement meeting. Human construction priorities are creating problems for the entire colony." Tom wiped his hands on a cloth and gave the Zephyrian his full attention. "What kind of problems?" "Resource allocation problems," Grex said. "You consume materials for unnecessary comfort projects while other species complete essential infrastructure. Your smokehouse uses stones that could reinforce defensive walls. Your library uses timber that could expand housing capacity. Your residential area uses 3 times the land required for efficient shelter," Silana added in her musical voice. "The ethereals wonder why humans require so much individual space. In nature, cooperation means sharing resources, not claiming excessive territory for personal use." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I see the concern. Let's walk through the settlement and I'll explain our reasoning." They started at the Zephyrian Dome, a marvel of geometric precision and efficient use of space. 20 beings lived in perfect harmony, each occupying exactly the calculated minimum area for health and functionality. Sleeping alcoves, workstations, and common areas flowed together in mathematical perfection. "Beautiful work," Tom said, and meant it. "How's everyone feeling about the living situation?" "Functioning optimally," Ralphie replied, though something in his tone made Amy raise an eyebrow. "No problems with privacy, personal space, quiet time for individual thinking." Ralphie hesitated. "Some minor inefficiencies in personal productivity, occasional conflicts over resource allocation. But these are normal adaptation issues. They moved to the Thorian excavation, descending into tunnels carved from living rock. The underground complex offered perfect protection from weather and potential threats. Families lived in solid chambers, connected by straight corridors lit by efficient LED strips. Everything was practical, durable, and built to last centuries." "Impressive engineering," Tom said to Grex. "How are the children adjusting the massive—" Thorian's expression darkened slightly. "Some behavioral irregularities. Youth expressing unusual desires to spend time on the surface. Some adults reporting difficulty with sleep cycles, nothing that cannot be managed through discipline." The ethereal grove was beautiful in its organic integration with the landscape. Living trees formed walls and roofs, their leaves providing natural temperature control and air filtration. The ethereals moved through their spaces like water flowing through channels, each individual part of the greater whole. "This is amazing," Amy said, touching a wall of woven branches. "How do you handle individual needs? Personal possessions? Private conversations?" Silana's colors shifted to cooler hues. "We are discovering that some individuals require more solitude than our traditional lifestyle provides. This creates challenges for group harmony." Finally, they toured the human settlement. Tom showed them the smokehouse, where preserved meats hung in aromatic clouds of smoke. "This isn't just about food storage," he explained. "Good food affects morale. When people enjoy their meals, they're happier, healthier, more productive. That meat will last 6 months without refrigeration, and it tastes better than anything we could make with standard preservation methods." At the library construction site, he pointed to the large windows and carefully planned lighting. "Information. Storage is just one function. This will be a community center, a place for learning and cultural exchange, a quiet space for thinking and planning. Every successful human settlement has had places dedicated to intellectual growth and cultural preservation." In the residential area, he showed them family units with separate bedrooms, private kitchens, and living rooms designed for relaxation. "Humans need personal space and family privacy to maintain psychological health. We need places to be alone, to be with just our families, and to gather as a community. Different activities require different environments." "But this is so inefficient," Ralphie protested. "You could house the same population in half the space." "Could," Tom agreed. "But efficiency isn't our only goal. We're not trying to survive the minimum amount of time with the minimum resources. We're trying to build a place where humans can be happy for generations." "Happiness is a luxury," Grex stated firmly. "Survival comes first." Amy stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "For humans, happiness isn't a luxury. It's a survival requirement. Unhappy humans become depressed, unproductive, and eventually self-destructive. We've seen it throughout our history. Societies that focus only on basic survival needs eventually collapse because they don't address the psychological requirements of their people." She gestured toward the other settlements. "You're all having the same problems. Zephyrians are experiencing social conflicts because they have no privacy. Thorians are dealing with behavioral issues because people need sunlight and open space. Ethereals are struggling with individual needs because complete community integration doesn't work for everyone." Tom added, "We're not behind schedule. We're building for different criteria. By winter, you'll have survival. We'll have sustainability. And there's a difference that matters more than you might think." The 3 alien leaders exchanged glances. None of them could argue with the logic, but accepting it meant acknowledging that their own approaches might be incomplete. "We will observe," Ralphie said finally. "But if human methods prove insufficient for survival, you will need to adapt quickly." "Fair enough," Tom said. "But I think you'll find that survival and living well aren't opposite goals. They're actually the same thing, just measured over different timescales." As the alien leaders departed, Amy watched their settlements with new eyes. Already she could see signs of strain. The perfect efficiency of the other colonies was beginning to crack under the pressure of psychological needs they hadn't considered. Winter would test all their approaches, but she suspected the humans had built for the right kind of strength. The kind that came from understanding what people needed to thrive, not just survive. The first storm arrived without warning, turning the purple sky black and sending sheets of rain across the settlement like nature's own assault. Pete Wilson stood at the window of the completed library, watching water run down glass panes while wind howled around the building's corners. The structure held firm, its oversized foundation and careful construction proving their worth as the weather tried to tear it apart. "Good thing we overbuilt this place," he said to Amy, who sat reading by the fire they'd lit in the central hearth. The library had become the unofficial meeting place for the entire colony during the past month, though few admitted why they kept finding excuses to visit. Tom knew what he was doing, Amy replied, turning a page in her book about local plant life. Around her, scattered across comfortable chairs and reading tables, members from all 5 species worked quietly. The Zephyrian Ralthi studied engineering. Manuals while his people dealt with overcrowding issues in their dome. 2 young Thorians huddled together over a picture book, their parents having sent them up from the tunnels, where behavioral problems grew worse each day. The storm passed after 6 hours, but it left behind something more than just muddy ground and broken branches. It left behind the clear knowledge that winter was coming, and with it, weather that would make this small storm look gentle. Tom emerged from the smokehouse where he'd spent the storm checking on the meat supplies. The building had performed perfectly, maintaining steady temperature and humidity despite the chaos outside. Months of smoking had produced not just preserved food, but delicacies. The local game, combined with native herbs and spices, created flavors that made even simple meals feel special. "How are we doing on food stores?" Amy asked as Tom joined her by the library fire. "Better than expected," he said, settling into one of the padded chairs they'd built during slow construction days. "The smokehouse has processed enough meat to last the entire colony through winter if needed, and the taste is actually improving with age. This was important because the other settlements were struggling with food issues. The Zephyrians had built efficient hydroponic systems that produced nutritionally complete but utterly flavorless food. The Thorians had established underground growing chambers that yielded adequate calories but no variety. The Ethereals had cultivated symbiotic relationships with native plants that provided sustenance but left their people visibly unhappy with every meal. "Speaking of the colony," Pete said, looking out at the settlements visible through the rain-streaked windows, "looks like we're about to have visitors." A group approached through the mud, led by Grex, whose massive frame made walking through the storm's aftermath look easy. Behind him came Ralphie, moving with less than his usual precise grace, and Silana, her normally flowing movement hampered by obvious fatigue. They entered the library shaking water from their clothes and looking around with expressions that mixed admiration with something approaching envy. The space was warm, dry, and welcoming. Soft lighting from both windows and artificial sources created an atmosphere that invited relaxation. The books and data storage systems were obviously important, but the comfortable seating areas and quiet atmosphere served needs beyond just information access. "Tom," Grex said without preamble, "we need to discuss colony-wide food distribution." "Problems?" Tom asked, though the answer was obvious from their expressions. "Morale issues," Ralphie admitted, his usual precise language wavering slightly. "Food production meets all nutritional requirements, but population satisfaction continues declining. Some Zephyrians have begun refusing meals despite adequate caloric content," Silana added sadly. "The ethereal young express unhappiness with traditional foods. They speak of craving interesting flavors and food that makes us feel good. These are concepts we do not fully understand." Tom exchanged glances with Amy. They'd seen this coming for weeks as members from other species found excuses to visit during human mealtimes. The smell of properly prepared food, seasoned and cooked, with care rather than just efficiency, drew people like nothing else. "Food is more than fuel," Amy explained gently. "For most species, eating is a social activity, a cultural expression, a source of pleasure as well as nutrition. When food tastes good, it affects mood, social bonding, and overall psychological health." "This is inefficient thinking," Grex protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Tom stood and gestured toward the library's large windows. Outside, the other settlements were visible in the gray afternoon light. "Let's talk about efficiency. How are your people doing, really?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the nearby smokehouse. Finally, Ralphie spoke first. Zephyrian. Productivity has declined 17% from optimal levels. Social conflicts have increased, particularly around personal space and resource allocation. Some individuals spend excessive time outside the dome, claiming need for privacy and quiet time. These behaviors are unprecedented in our species, Grex admitted reluctantly. Thorian youth exhibit behavioral anomalies. They request surface time beyond safety protocols. Adults report sleep difficulties and what they term feeling trapped. Construction efficiency has dropped as workers require more frequent breaks. Silana's colors shifted to deep, troubled hues. Ethereals experience internal conflict. Our traditional communal lifestyle creates stress for individuals who require personal space. Some seek isolation. Others become aggressive in group settings. Our harmony is disrupted by needs we do not recognize. Tom nodded sympathetically. You're all experiencing the same thing. The difference between surviving and thriving. Your basic needs are met: food, shelter, safety. But intelligent species have psychological needs too. Personal space, beauty, variety, comfort, intellectual stimulation, cultural expression. When those needs aren't met, physical health doesn't matter. People become depressed, anxious, unproductive. He led them through the library, showing them features that seemed decorative, but served important psychological functions. Art from all 5 cultures decorated the walls. Quiet reading nooks provided private space for individual reflection. The central fireplace created a gathering point that felt welcoming rather than merely functional. Large windows provided views of the natural landscape that helped combat the claustrophobia of enclosed spaces. This building isn't just for storing books, he explained. It's for feeding the mind and spirit. People come here not because they need information, but because they need a place that makes them feel good about being alive. At the Smokehouse, he showed them the true genius of the human approach. The preserved meats weren't just survival food, they were cuisine. Different cuts prepared with different herb combinations created variety and flavor that transformed eating from a chore into a pleasure. More importantly, the process of preparing and sharing good food brought people together, creating social bonds and cultural connections. We trade these with your people, Tom pointed out. Not because anyone is starving, but because good food improves life in ways that go beyond nutrition. A person who enjoys their dinner is happier, more productive, more cooperative the next day. In the residential area, he showed them how human living spaces addressed psychological needs they hadn't considered. Private bedrooms provided personal space and quiet time. Family kitchens allowed cultural food preparation and intimate family bonding. Common areas facilitated social interaction while separate spaces allowed for solitude when needed. It looks wasteful, Tom acknowledged. But it's actually more efficient in the long run. Happy people work better, live longer, cause fewer problems. They're more creative, more cooperative, more resilient when facing challenges. The 3 alien leaders stood in the drizzling rain, looking at the human settlement with new understanding. Around them, their own people could be seen gravitating toward human spaces, reading in the library, trading work for smoked meat, lingering in the residential common areas where they were always welcome. Winter approaches, Grex said finally. Our current structures provide survival, but if your analysis is correct, survival may not be sufficient. It's not too late, Amy said gently. The basic infrastructure you've built is excellent, but you might consider modifications that address psychological needs alongside physical ones. More private space in the dome, surface access from the tunnels, individual areas within the communal grove. Ralphie processed this with his characteristic precision. You propose that comfort and beauty are not luxury additions to survival requirements, but integral components of long-term colony success. Exactly, Tom said. We build for who we are, not just what we need to stay alive. And what intelligent beings need includes hope, beauty, personal dignity, cultural continuity, and reasons to be glad they survived another day. As the alien leaders departed to consider modifications to their settlements, Amy watched from the library windows. The first winter storm had passed, but it had revealed something important. The humans hadn't fallen behind in construction. They had built for different and ultimately more important criteria. They had built not just to survive the winter, but to emerge from it as a thriving community rather than a group of beings who had simply avoided dying. The difference would matter more with each passing season, and the other species were beginning to understand why humans took such care with comfort, culture, and the seemingly inefficient luxuries that made life worth living. Outside, the smokehouse chimney drew its thin line into the clearing sky, and the library windows glowed warm and inviting as evening approached. Winter was coming, but the humans were ready not just to endure it, but to find joy and meaning, even in the darkest season. Winter struck Kepler 186f like a hammer blow. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 days, and snow fell in thick curtains that turned the familiar landscape into an alien maze of white drifts and ice-laden trees. The wind howled across the settlement with a voice that seemed to carry messages of isolation and despair. In the Zephyrian dome, 20 beings huddled in mathematically efficient spaces that suddenly felt like a prison. The perfect geometric curves that had seemed so elegant now trapped stale air and magnified every small sound until privacy became impossible. Ralphie stood at the dome's single large window, watching the storm rage outside and feeling something he'd never experienced before: the crushing weight of confinement. "Administrator," said one of his people, approaching with the hesitant manner that had become common over the past weeks. "The evening meal distribution has created another conflict. Personal space requirements exceed available area during food consumption." Ralphie closed his eyes. 3 months ago, such a statement would have made no sense. Zephyrians ate efficiently, requiring only sufficient space to consume nutrition. But now, after exposure to human concepts of dining and social interaction around food, his people craved something their dome couldn't provide: the ability to eat in comfort, to converse without being overheard by 19 other beings, to enjoy their food rather than simply process it. Underground, the Thorian families faced different but equally challenging problems. The tunnels that had seemed so secure now felt like burial chambers. Children who had once played contentedly in the open air now exhibited behaviors that worried their parents: listlessness, aggression, and a disturbing tendency to stare at the tunnel walls as if trying to see through them to the surface. Grex found his youngest daughter, Kira, sitting in their family chamber with her back pressed against the stone wall and tears running down her gray cheeks. "Small one," he said gently, settling his massive frame beside her. "What troubles you?" "I want to see the sky," she whispered. "I dream about it every night, big and open and full of light. But when I wake up, there's just stone and darkness and the same walls every day." Grex felt something crack inside his chest. Thorian children were raised to value security and permanence above all else, but this child, his child, was withering in the safety he'd built for her. The ethereals faced perhaps the most difficult challenge of all. Their beautiful living grove had become a maze of competing needs and conflicting desires. Individual ethereals, influenced by months of interaction with human concepts of personal space and individual identity, began seeking solitude. But their traditional architecture provided no privacy, and their cultural practices had no framework for individual needs that differed from group harmony. Silana found herself standing in the falling snow outside her own grove, unable to face another evening of forced communal togetherness. Her people needed her leadership, but she needed something they couldn't provide: silence, solitude, and the space to think her own thoughts without the constant presence of others. It was Pete, Wilson, who found her there, shivering in the snow with her translucent skin shifting through colors of distress. "Hey there," he said gently, approaching with the slow caution he'd use with a wounded animal. "Pretty cold night to be standing around outside." "I require solitude," she said in her musical voice, now discordant with strain. "But my people require my presence. These needs cannot both be satisfied." Pete nodded, understanding. "Come on. There's someone you should talk to." He led her through the storm to the human library, now blazing with warm light in the frozen landscape. Inside, representatives from all the settlements had gathered, not for any official meeting, but because it was the only place in the colony that felt like refuge, rather than merely shelter. Tom looked up from a chair by the fire where he'd been reading to a mixed group of human and alien children. The youngsters sat in rapt attention as he told stories from Earth's history, tales of adventure and exploration that seemed to ease the claustrophobia that plagued everyone during the endless storms. "Rough night out there," Tom said as Pete and Silana entered, shaking snow from their clothes. Around the library, the scene told the story of the winter's true impact. Zephyrian adults sat alone at reading tables, finally able to enjoy privacy and quiet time. Young Thorians played games in the children's section, their behavior noticeably calmer in the bright, open spaces. Ethereals browsed the art collections, some together, others blissfully alone for the first time in months. "Tom," Silana said, her colors gradually shifting to calmer hues in the library's warmth. "We must speak of colony reorganization. I figured this conversation was coming," Tom said, closing the book and giving her his full attention. "The winter's been harder than expected." Ralphie emerged from a quiet reading nook where he'd been studying human psychology texts with the focused intensity his species brought to all learning. "The current settlement design creates psychological stress that reduces survival capability. This is a logical problem requiring logical solutions." Grex climbed up from the library's lower level, where he'd been teaching Thorian children to build with wooden blocks instead of only stone. His daughter Kira followed close behind, her gray skin noticeably brighter than it had been in weeks. "Human methods work," he said simply. "Our methods provide safety, but not wellness. In extended crisis, wellness becomes safety requirement." Amy joined them, carrying a tray of hot beverages from the library's small kitchen area. The drinks were a mixture of human coffee and local herbs that created something new and warming. As the alien leaders accepted the cups, Tom noticed how such simple comforts, warmth, flavor, hospitality, immediately improved their demeanor. "What kind of reorganization are you thinking about?" Tom asked. "Integration," Ralphie said. "Not replacement of existing structures, but modification to incorporate human psychological principles. The dome requires private spaces. The tunnels require surface access and natural light. The grove requires individual retreats alongside communal areas." Silana added, "We have observed that humans share resources and spaces without losing individual identity. The library demonstrates this principle. All species use the facility, but each finds what they personally require." "The Smokehouse," Grex said, gesturing toward the river where the building continued its slow work despite the storm, "serves practical needs but also provides social gathering. Food preparation becomes cultural activity. Efficiency serves happiness, not just survival." Tom smiled. "You're talking about building community instead of just separate settlements." "Precisely," Ralphie said. "Current approach creates 5 isolated populations sharing one planet. Human approach suggests integrated community with shared resources and diverse architecture meeting varied needs." Amy leaned forward with the enthusiasm she brought to all anthropological discoveries. "The key is understanding that different species have different comfort requirements, but everyone needs some form of beauty, privacy, social connection, and cultural expression. The specific forms don't matter as much as recognizing the needs exist." Outside, the storm continued raging, but inside the library, something important was taking shape. Representatives from all 5 species began planning not just modifications to existing settlements, but a new kind of colonial architecture. The Zephyrians would expand their dome with private alcoves and quiet spaces, while maintaining their efficient communal areas. The Thorians would cut skylights and surface access tunnels, bringing natural light underground while keeping their security. The Ethereals would cultivate individual garden retreats within their living grove, allowing solitude without abandoning their connection to nature. But more importantly, they would build shared facilities modeled on human psychological architecture, community kitchens where all species could prepare and share food, workshop spaces where different skills could be taught and learned, recreation areas designed for multiple types of social interaction. The Smokehouse and library work because they serve universal needs in culturally flexible ways, Tom explained. Good food makes everyone happier. Quiet spaces for learning and reflection benefit every species. The specific design details matter, less than understanding what people actually require to thrive. As the evening wore on and the storm continued outside, the library fulfilled its true purpose. It wasn't just a repository for information. It was a place where different cultures could meet, share, and discover common ground. Children from all species played together while adults planned a future that would combine the best aspects of each approach to colonial life. When spring comes, Silana said, her colors now shifting through the warm spectrum of contentment, we will build not just better shelters, but a true community. Winter's not over yet, Pete pointed out practically. We've still got 2 months of storms ahead of us. Which gives us time to plan properly, Tom said, and to test some ideas on a smaller scale. Grex nodded slowly. Thorian engineering can adapt quickly. We can cut surface access within days, install lighting systems to bring daylight below ground, small changes that address immediate needs. The dome can be modified with temporary partitions, Ralphie added. Privacy screens and individual spaces that do not require complete reconstruction. As if to emphasize Pete's point about winter's continuation, a particularly fierce gust of wind rattled the library's windows. But instead of feeling trapped by the storm, the mixed group of colonists found themselves energized by plans for the future. You know what the real discovery is? Amy said, looking around at the gathering. It's not that humans have all the answers. It's that every species has needs beyond basic survival, but we all address those needs differently. The solution isn't making everyone live like humans. It's creating spaces flexible enough to meet different comfort requirements. Tom watched the alien children playing with human toys while their parents planned integrated communities. 6 months ago, this scene would have been impossible to imagine. Different species working together not just to survive, but to create something better than any of them could build alone. The winter taught us something important, he said finally. Survival isn't just about lasting until spring. It's about making sure the people who survive are still the people you want to be when the snow melts. Outside, the storm continued its assault on their small outpost of civilization. But inside the library, warmed by fire and human wisdom about what intelligent beings truly needed to thrive, 5 species planned a future that would prove humans right about the difference between existing and living. The Smokehouse worked steadily through the night, preserving not just food, but the understanding that comfort and culture weren't luxuries to be added after survival was assured. They were the foundation upon which real survival, the kind that lasted generations, was built. Spring arrived on Kepler 186f like a promise kept. The snow melted in rushing streams that carried winter's memory toward the distant ocean, and the first green shoots pushed through soil that had been frozen for months. Amy Foster stood on the hill where the library dominated the landscape, watching the transformation below with something approaching wonder. The colony that spread across. The valley bore little resemblance to the scattered settlements that had struggled through winter. Where 5 separate clusters had once dotted the landscape, an integrated community now thrived. The changes had begun small during the worst of the winter storms, but spring had allowed the full vision to flourish. The original Zephyrian dome still rose in its geometric perfection, but now it connected to a series of smaller structures through covered walkways. Each addition provided the privacy and individual space that Zephyrians discovered they needed while maintaining the efficiency they valued. Inside the dome, Ralphie worked at a personal desk in a quiet alcove, finally able to concentrate without the constant presence of 19 other beings. "The productivity improvements have been remarkable," he told Amy during her morning tour of the settlement. "Individual work efficiency increased 37% once private spaces were available. Social conflicts decreased to near zero. The psychological principles humans demonstrated have proven mathematically sound." The Thorian underground complex had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Grex had supervised the cutting of multiple surface access points, creating a network of tunnels that led to above-ground pavilions. Natural light now reached the deepest chambers through carefully placed skylights and mirror systems. What had been a fortress was now an underground city that breathed with the surface world. "Look, Miss Amy," called Kira, Grex's daughter, as she emerged from one of the new surface access points. The young Thorian's gray skin held a healthy vibrancy that had been missing during the dark months underground. "We can see the sky from our bedroom now." Behind her came other Thorian children, all showing the improved behavior and energy that natural light and open access had provided. The adults, too, seemed transformed, no longer carrying the hunched shoulders and worried expressions that had marked their winter confinement. The ethereal grove had evolved into something unprecedented in their species' history. While maintaining their living architecture of shaped trees and woven branches, Ciliana had cultivated individual garden retreats throughout the larger structure. Each ethereal now had a private space where they could retire for solitude and individual reflection, while still participating in the communal life that defined their culture. "We have learned that individuality and community are not opposing forces," Ciliana explained as she walked Amy through the grove's new configuration. Her colors shifted through peaceful blues and greens as she spoke. "Personal space allows for better participation in group activities. Privacy enhances rather than diminishes our harmony." But the most striking change was how the entire settlement had developed around the 3 structures that had puzzled the aliens during those first months of construction. The Smokehouse had become the culinary heart of the colony, where representatives from all species worked together to prepare and preserve food. What had started as a human survival technique had evolved into a cultural exchange program. "Try this," said Pete Wilson, offering Amy a strip of meat that had been prepared using ethereal spices and Zephyrian preservation techniques. The flavor was unlike anything from Earth, but unmistakably appealing. A fusion cuisine that represented their new shared culture. The library had evolved far beyond its original function as an information repository. It served as school, community center, cultural museum, and social hub. Different species taught their children together in its bright rooms, while adults gathered in the evenings to share stories, plan community projects, and simply enjoy each other's company. "Most interesting development," observed Tom as he joined Amy at one of the library's large windows. Below them, the community went about its daily business with an energy and cooperation that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "Watch how they move through the space." Amy looked closer and saw what Tom meant. The colonists didn't segregate by species anymore. Zephyrians worked alongside Thorians in the workshops. Ethereal children played with human youngsters in the gardens. Mixed groups gathered around the smokehouse for meals and conversation. The community had integrated not through force or regulation, but through the natural human understanding that comfortable, beautiful spaces encouraged positive social interaction. "The formal report to the Galactic Settlement Council is due today," Amy said. "What are you going to tell them?" Tom smiled, pulling up a datapad with transmission logs from other colonial efforts. The truth, that survival isn't just about making it through the first year. It's about building something sustainable for the long term. The reports from other colonies made sobering reading. Of the 12 multi-species settlements attempted in the past 5 years, 7 had failed completely. The colonists had either abandoned their efforts or fractured into isolated groups that barely cooperated on basic survival needs. The successful colonies had devolved into separate communities that happened to share the same planet, not integrated societies. Only Kepler 186f has achieved true integration, Tom continued. And the difference isn't our superior technology or better resources. It's our understanding that intelligent beings need more than food and shelter to thrive. As if to prove his point, a group of mixed-species children ran past the library windows, chasing some kind of local butterfly through the gardens that now connected all the residential areas. Their laughter carried on the spring breeze, a sound that would have been impossible in the sterile, efficient settlements the aliens had originally built. The Council is requesting that we establish protocols for future settlements, Amy said, reading from her own datapad. They want to understand why our psychological architecture approach succeeded where pure efficiency failed. Tom began composing his response to the Council, but stopped to watch as Grex emerged from one of his surface pavilions, carrying a wooden sculpture he'd been carving during the winter months. The massive Thorian had discovered that working with his hands on non-essential projects helped him think more clearly about engineering challenges. He'd taken up art as therapy and found it improved his primary job performance. The key insight, Tom said, continuing his report, is that comfort, beauty, and psychological well-being aren't luxuries to be added after basic survival is assured. They're the foundation of sustainable survival. A colony that meets only physical needs will eventually fail because the colonists will lose the will to continue. He attached visual documentation showing the settlement's evolution from winter isolation to spring integration. The images told the story better than words. Beings from 5 different species working, playing, learning, and living together, because they had spaces that made cooperation pleasant rather than merely necessary. What we built wasn't just better buildings, he concluded in his report. We built the understanding that home isn't a place where you survive. Home is a place where you want to be, and when people want to be somewhere, they take care of it. They invest in it. They build it into something that lasts. The final section of his report included requests from the other colonial efforts. Word had spread through the Galactic Settlement Council about the success on Kepler 186f. And colonies that were struggling with social cohesion, psychological problems, and integration failures were asking for consultation on implementing human psychological architecture principles. They want to send delegations here to study our methods, Amy said, reading over his shoulder. Good, Tom replied. But they need to understand that it's not about copying what we built. It's about understanding what their people need to be happy, then building spaces that provide those things alongside basic survival requirements. As evening approached, the community gathered in the large open space between the library and the Smokehouse for their daily meal. This tradition had evolved naturally over the winter months, as people discovered that eating together improved both the food and the social bonds that held their community together. Amy watched families from all 5 species sharing tables, children playing together while adults discussed everything from engineering projects to artistic endeavors. The scene looked effortless now, but she remembered the careful thought and planning that had gone into creating spaces where such integration could happen naturally. "You know what the real success is?" she said to Tom as they prepared to join the community dinner. "It's not that we solved the survival problem, it's that we made survival something people wanted to do." Around them, the settlement glowed in the orange light of Kepler 186f's red dwarf star. The smokehouse sent its thin line of smoke into the evening sky, promising good food and social gathering. The library's windows blazed with warm light, inviting learning and cultural exchange. The residential areas hummed with the quiet activity of families settling in for the night in spaces designed for comfort as well as shelter. Tom submitted his report to the Galactic Settlement Council with a sense of satisfaction. They had proven that humans brought something unique to colonial efforts. Not superior technology or physical capabilities, but wisdom about what intelligent beings needed to build lives worth living. The smokehouse, library, and comfortable homes had become more than buildings. They were symbols of the human understanding that civilization wasn't about merely surviving another day. It was about creating reasons to be glad you had survived and building something worth passing on to the next generation. As spring settled over their new world, the colony of Kepler 186f stood as proof that when humans built for comfort, culture, and community alongside basic survival, they created something that lasted, something that thrived, something that made the galaxy a little more civilized, one comfortable home at a time.